Hello, I am Kyatric, and today I'm making this video for the Construct 2 Academy. This is the part 2 of this video on making a dialog system using XML. If you haven't already, please check part 1. We are now in the event sheet of our project. You may already know it. Event sheet and Construct 2 are read top from bottom. And whenever an event is encountered, its conditions are tested. And if all the conditions of the event are true, then the action of this event are being executed. I first start the event sheet with a bit of variables that I'm going to use. The first variable, you can see it's a bit of a trick, to be honest, is a global variable, and it's a constant one, which means that first off, its name is going to be all caps locks, and its value will never change. So currently the f_dialog number variable value is always going to be 0 and never change throughout the execution of our program. It also means that whenever I'm trying to use an action like add to or set value or subtract from, the f_dialog number variable is not appearing in the choice I can have. It can be useful for when you are using a lot of variables and to tidy up your project. This variable is only used in the setNextDialog function. I will go back to it a bit later. Whenever an event is encountered from top to bottom, it is being executed. Exception to this rule, the trigger. The trigger is any condition that has the green arrow on the left of it, and it means that it can happen at a different time than the exact top to bottom read from the event sheet. Nonetheless, in our event sheet, we can still organize from top to bottom to keep the logic of our mechanic. Function is actually an event that contains actions, and it can have also sub-events which are nested to it. The action from the function are only going to happen and be executed when in our code we encounter the action function call name of the function and put parameters into it if required. The first function I've implemented in the Kyatric is the log debug actually. So it's just a function that is going to display some text into our txtdebug object. And there you can see that it's going to set the text from the txtdebug, the current text, to self. The self keyword is referring actually to the txtdebug object. The self keyword is always referring to the instance of the object used in actions, or possibly into conditions when you are doing some picking. So we are taking the current text being displayed in the text debug object. The Greek and symbol there means that we are concatenating, we are adding to what we have previously. So to the current text we are adding a new line, a system expression, and system expression is once again in the manual. You can find them, very important, in the system reference, system expressions. You can read about all the system expressions that are available. So it's basically adding a new line, like if I'm writing in my notepad, for example, and pressing the return key, it will add a new line and go to the next line. So I'm adding a new line, and I'm adding the parameter 0, that's the first parameter that is set when calling the log d function. So in my action on start of layout, log d, an example Kyatric of a dialog system by Kyatric, it means that I'm calling the log d function, this function there, and I'm passing as a parameter, parameter 0, as you can see, this bit of text, which means that I'm going to take the current text being displayed in the txt debug object, adding a new line to it, and adding an example calyx of dialog system by Kyatric. When I preview, on start of layout, you can see that the first line is empty. It has added a new line, and we have the line that is set. So this is how we are going to log anything we want. I could add, concatenate something, and add, for example, the value of the cure, which is current dialog value. It's a global variable that I want to display it. And so I am done. And if I'm executing it, you can see that now there is a 0 added to our function as well, because I've passed it as a part of the parameter there. So on start of layout we are doing a bit of things. So first thing, we are calling the log function. We are also using, the only time that we are actually using the Ajax plugin to request the dialogs.xml file with the tag storyload. So any Ajax request needs a tag, because as you can see in the next event, we are using the tag to see if the request is being completed. And the request is a project file, the dialogs.xml file. So we are basically loading a local file into our program on start of the layout. This is asynchronous, so that's why we need the next event to know when the loading is being complete. Still, while this is going to happen, our next actions are going to be executed as well. So we have our under dialog, which is being displayed on correct position. We set also the position of the txt dialog and txt name. It's basically build up our interface. We also set the dialog layer to be visible. By default it is, but you will see that when we are reloading our project at the end, it was useful to add this action. When our store reload Ajax request is completed, it means that the content of dialogs.xml is in the ajax.lastDataExpression. So from there I can use this expression and load the XML document from it. Next step is to call the function setNextDialog. So from here it's really implementation of the reading of my XML structure the way I have decided it, and I'm implementing it through different functions that we are going to loop through to read the dialog, to read the content of the dialog, display it, and know what is the next dialog to be displayed in the same order of ID. If the dialog is a question, it's going to display the question, display the answers, and know that according to the picked answer we are going to go to one next dialog or another. And this is our implementation. We start with the setNextDialog function, and as I was saying, a little trick there. I will go back to my constant global variable. Instead of using the 0 parameter, the number itself, I'm setting the current dialog value to be f_dialog number parameter. I haven't used it anywhere else in this current example. It's very useful when you are dealing with arrays, or if you have a lot of parameters, because instead of having 0, 1, 2, and forgetting what each parameter is supposed to be in your various functions, variable name allows it to be a bit more readable. So we know that we set the cur dialog value to be according to the parameter dialog number. We are passing a value to our function which is supposed to be a dialog number. So as you can see back there, set next dialog, and I'm passing the number 1, which means, going back to my XML file, that I'm actually reading this current dialog, the dialog ID 1. I'm setting the current line to 0, it's kind of reset. Same thing with the txt answer and cursor answer. We will go back to it a bit later. So now we are picking the dialog type according to an attribute in our XML file. You can see that the dialog ID1 block there is of type normal. I want to know that it is normal because I will have to check upon this a bit later. So to do so, the dialog type variable is actually a text, not a number. And the dialog type there is set to the XML object dot string value, which is an expression that is going to return a specific text according to the XML path I'm sending to it. So I'm starting with my root, the my game tag, and it's important to always use the good caps lock in your path. To be honest, I've had issues where I was using this, and just this made it so that the XML structure wasn't found because there is no dialog tag with a capital D. My root, my dialog, I'm using a bracket at ID, which is the attribute, and passing there the cur dialog value. So it's actually allowing the XML object to know that I'm willing to have my attribute type returned, but only the type for the dialog tag, which is of ID attribute cur dialog. I hope it makes sense. It's where it's getting a bit complicated. It's mental gymnastic. This attribute there is going to be returned and only returned for the dialog ID of cur dialog. And if you remember, we are currently with a cur dialog value of 1. In the dialog ID 1, the type is normal, and normal is going to be returned. And for example, if we wanted right there to be sure it is the case, we can simply hold down the control key, take an action, drag drop it right there, and I can log, and I want to log the dialog type value. And to be a bit clearer about it, dialog type returned. And so don't forget to put a space in between your quotes, because the dialog type doesn't have spaces in it. And so if you don't have the space right there, you will simply end up with a line without the space. So if I test now, you can see that my dialog type returned is normal. So that's working. And the next step, once I have the current dialog type, I'm displaying the dialog, and you can see that this function does take no parameters, and that's most of our function from now on, to be honest. They are mostly used as containers of action and sub-events. We have called our next dialog, we have returned the dialog type for the current dialog tag, and we are displaying it. Displaying it, the first thing we do is to check out what kind of type it is. As you can see, I've decided on 3 types for my XML structure, as I was saying previously, either normal, question, or end. Normal, we will start by adding 1 to the cur line global variable value. Cur to me is always short for current. It's a preference of mine. You can call it whatever you want. And so once we have added 1 to the current line, we display the line. If the type is a question, we are going back to it a bit later, we will be displaying a question. It's another function that is going to do the work. And finally, if our dialog type is end, and if you remember in the XML file, the dialog type end is at the end, it's the ID 5, and it's just a blank dialog, we actually are at the end of our conversation. So that's, as I was saying, the moment I'm making my dialog layer invisible, I'm making the button visible, and setting its size and its current text. I know that when I'm hitting a dialog tab end, it's the end of the current dialog. So from there, from this example, I'm just hiding the dialog and allowing for the user to restart the dialog, restart the layout. In your game, you would actually give back the hand to your player so that he can go on and, I don't know, move its character or go into inventory or whatever. You are going out from the dialog phase. So currently, we know that we are displaying a normal dialog, so we are going to follow this, the display line. We are displaying one line. You can see there a local variable. A local variable only exists in the scope of the current event. So it means that outside of the display line function, this variable doesn't exist. But as it is placed as a lower position to the function, it means that any sub-event from this function is going to have access to this variable. And as you can see, the first thing we do is to set the anim name according to the XML file. This is getting even a bit more complicated, although it's in the same order of ID of how we have returned the dialog type previously. So we are still using the XML string value. We are still passing the path, my game as a root, the dialog. We are still picking the dialog which ID parameter is equal to cur dialog. We are now going for the line tag, which is contained in the dialog. So let's go back to it in our dialog. That's the line, which also has an ID. And this ID is actually the value of cur line. If we remember, in display dialog, we've added 1 to cur line, so the value is currently 1, which means that in this very first expression, I'm willing to get or return the portrait attributes for the line of ID cur line of ID 1 in the dialog type of ID 1. Portrait in the line 1 of my dialog 1 is teacher. And we pretty much copy the exact same line, and instead of the portrait, we get the mood. And you can notice also that concatenated in between those two is an underscore. And if you remember, a name and a mood, let's go back, a name underscore mood. That's the name of our animation. So we are setting the animation name to be displayed with a single line of code right there, and it works because we have made sure to always have the character name and its mood, and that it was equivalent. So you can see that the teacher has a capital letter, the mood doesn't, and in our XML file, the character name or portrait name does have a capital letter, the mood doesn't. And you can see that we are using neutral mood, surprised mood, and pretty much only using moods that appear in our animations. And right next after it, I'm simply setting the animation according to the animation name I've just got back from the XML file. And to know then what is the dialog line to display, I'm setting the txt dialog object. So remember, this is this one which has the txt to display instance variable, text. I'm setting the value of this instance variable to be actually the text, open parenthesis, close parenthesis. This keyword, the text and the parenthesis, means that I'm just willing to get everything there. The text itself. So that's the line I want to be displayed. From there, I'm setting the txt dialog object to be showing text. It is not finished. The text itself that is displaying currently is empty. And for further interface, I'm setting its vertical alignment to bottom. By default, it is the case. You can see that vertical alignment is there, the bottom. But when I'm using the txt dialog to display a question, I'm actually changing this alignment. So whenever I'm displaying a regular line, I want it to be displayed from the bottom, so I'm setting it here. The txt name object will actually get the portrait attribute. So in our case, teacher with a capital T. We stop the cursor from flashing and we set it to invisible. Because of the flash behavior, we have to stop it from flashing for it to be actually really invisible. Just setting it invisible wouldn't do the job. I know what sprite animation I'm willing to display in my portrait object, and I am displaying it. I know what text I'm willing to display, and I'm setting up things to display it. And as well, I know and directly display set text for the name of the character that is currently talking. Next step is to set the position of the portrait object. I'm going back into my line, and this time checking for the position attribute and checking if it is left. Going back to it, you can see in my first line the position is indeed left, and in my next line it's going to be right, to have this kind of going forward, backward, talking to each other, facing each other, to give this cinematic impression. Once you have the good and working path, you can notice that you're pretty much copying and using it over and over again. We are still picking, if you will, the dialog tag in which the ID attribute is curDialog value, the line for which ID attribute value is equal to curLine, and we are just making sure that the pos attribute is equal to left. If it is, we set the position of the object according to an image point. My under dialog is currently a small image, as you can see. It's actually only a 32 by 32 texture, but it can be whatever you want. I've put several image points for it. The origin, the image point 1, which you can notice is going to be the right side, image point 2, which is going to be the left side, and image point 3, which is on top. And if we go back, you can see in start of layout, I'm setting the position of the txt name object according to the position of the image point number 3 of my under dialog object. I'm setting the portrait position to the image point number 2 when it's left, and else, that means that if it's not left, so it's right, it's the image point 1. Also, when it is left, the portrait doesn't need to be mirrored. Remember, that is our regular animation. It's facing right by default when it's not mirrored. That's what I'm currently wanting. The portrait is on the left, and when I'm going to mirror the image and place it on the right, it will give the impression that the character is looking to the left. Also, I'm setting the horizontal alignment of the txt dialog object according to the position of my portrait object to be sure that the text is not actually within the portrait itself. And it's also adding to this back and forth impression. So as you can see, left, right, the text is on the right, text is on the left, left, etc., etc. All is done. From now on, as we have set the txt dialog show text boolean variable to be true, that's what is going to be kicking in. And you can see there, the txt dialog is show text. So we are displaying a straight line or question. And so once again, we are testing what is our dialog type. The difference is that I've decided that on normal dialog, the text is being displayed in a timed fashion. I'm adding one letter after another, whereas when displaying a question, the full question is being displayed all at once. That's the difference between the two right there. For now, we will keep to our normal, and we can see that this is where how event works kicks back in. Every tick, when the txt dialog show text boolean variable is true and that the dialog type is normal, then our txt dialog text is going to be one more letter. To do so, you can see that I'm using a system expression, the system expression left. Once again, I'm sending you back to the manual system expression, and this is a string manipulation. This expression is going to use some text, so in our case we want the txt dialog txt to display instance variable, which actually contain the whole line we want to be displayed, and then we set the number of letters we want to display. And it is done using yet another system expression, this time len, for length, that is taking the current length of text we currently display. So at the very beginning we are displaying 0 character, we are adding 1 to this, and so now we are displaying 1 character from the txt dialog txt to display variable. We have 1 more character, and then the next tick, this all goes down again, and we will be displaying 2 characters. Then the next tick we are displaying 3 characters. It's a loop. And to make sure that we have reached the actual end of the line, we are checking that the length of the displayed line is equal to the length of the line to be displayed. And when it is, we set the show text boolean variable to false, because we won't want from there that this event happens anymore. But on the other hand, we will set the finished boolean variable to true, and it will kick in another event later on. Moreover, that is the signal where we want the cursor to be flashing and being displayed. So that's where I'm putting it, and I want it to flash forever, so I'm using the infinity system expression as the duration for the flash object. This is the end of our part 2. Be sure to check in for part 3. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Don't hesitate to check out some of the other Construct 2 Academy material. Thank you for watching.